So what are some of the major differences between the Sony ZV-E10 and the Sony a6400? Today we're going to be comparing both for video, so let's jump into it. The ZV-E10 is an industry disruptor, coming in at $699 for the body only and $798 if you want to include the kit lens. When you take a look at the a6400, all that it has to offer, coming in at $898 for the body only, and then coming in at $998 with the kit lens. Just so you know, we're not going to dive into a ton when it comes to the photo specs, so if that's something that you're looking for, this may not be the video for you, but let's dive into a lot of the similarities that these cameras share. So right off the rip, you're looking at unlimited recording up to 4K 30 frames per second on the Sony ZV-E10 as well as the a6400, 1080p 120 frames per second. That is on both of these cameras. So the video specs, honestly, are very, very similar. So there's actually been some confusion around the recording limits for the Sony ZV-E10. As you can see here, this file is over 22 gigabytes. It actually won't break it up into 4 gigabyte files. It'll actually do that only depending on your memory card. So you do want to make sure you're using a very good memory card with plenty of capacity. That is an SDXC. So something that is over that 64 gigabytes. I highly recommend the SanDisk Extreme Pro 128 gigabyte cards or better. Those usually work really well when it comes to your recording. You're really going to get a design that is more for photography and some video, even though it has unlimited recording, the 4K 30 and all of what we just mentioned. It has this flip up screen orientation so that when you are doing any kind of videography work or really for photos, you can flip this down and you can flip it up so that you could do videos. Now we've accepted the little bit of a clunky design that Sony introduced a few years ago, and it actually works when it comes to some of the other features like the clean HDMI. So the port that would be on the side of the camera here would just only dangle on the side. So you don't have to worry about any cables or anything being in the way. Whereas on the ZV-E10, you actually do have more of your ports and things like that, even like to, you know, open the door if, you know, the screen is there. It's kind of clunky. So if you had your cables here, yes, you would see them. And then of course it does, you know, block the door. So that's a thing. But does that really matter when it comes to live streaming and actually having your cables connected? To be honest, the honest answer is no. If you have this rigged up and let's say you get some of the cages like Ulanzi and Small Rig have coming out, then those will be fine because you can have additional adapters. Maybe you have a monitor and things like that that are on top. So even with a live streaming setup, you're not actually looking in this screen other than to verify that you're in the frame, because you mostly have that live streaming setup screen already available. So it's really not that big of a deal. It's been posed like it's a huge issue. In my opinion and use case, it hasn't been. So I just think it's something to note versus it being a problem. Plus, if it was on this side, then when you try to grip the camera, it would be in the way, and that's a little silly to me. Both of these cameras host a microphone import, but the ZV-E10 is a little different because you also will get a headphone port. This is something that you would have to invest in a Sony a6400. To have that on a camera that's much cheaper at $699 for the body only, the headphone port is massive. At the a6400, we don't have that. We only get a microphone port. We have the USB micro, and we also have that micro HDMI port, which a lot of people don't like. I've never had one break, get loose, or have any issues across, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4 Sony camera bodies that I own. Even with some of the Canon cameras that I've owned, I've never had that become an issue with using for videography work or with my regular content that I create that's more on a tripod. So your mileage may vary, but Small Rig also has adapters that can lock that into place if that's something that may pose a problem for you moving forward. One of the best things that a lot of creators enjoy is the ability to have digital stabilization on the sensor. Now, granted, it's not the IBIS like we see in the a6600, A7C or A7S3, but you do get digital, which we could only really use on the ZV-1 and then also for Sony's action camera. But the a6400, even though it has literally the exact same sensor, it doesn't have any kind of stabilization at all. Now, some people will see some of the results in my testing. I don't think that active is really for you to always have on. It just seems to disrupt the image. As far as the active stabilization is concerned, it's for shots like this, like you're not doing a ton of moving. So if you're vlogging standard, with optical or that OIS and Sony camera bodies. At least that's how I envision it, because I can't see it working well any other way. On the a6400, you're not getting any of that. It's just completely nothing. So you would need a gimbal, or you would need to figure something else out with the stabilization in software like Final Cut Pro 10. Now that introduces another thing, which is the Sony Catalyst Browse that's available to you only on select cameras. Well, the ZV-E10 makes that cut. Now what that is the ability to use digital stabilization, but it's software. So it's able to give you a much cleaner result. It will read the gyro data in the ZV-E10. Unfortunately, a6400 does not. You cannot use Sony Catalyst Browse with this. But when you're talking about some of the ports on here, we get USB-C, which is massive. USB-C allows for a lot of capabilities. Right now we're using this for charging as well as live streaming in the camera. The ZV-E10 can do that. A6400 cannot. I think the USB-C update is pretty significant because there's a lot that you can do with that. And I cannot be more happier with a flip out screen, a fully articulating screen instead of the flip screen. I've loved it. It's been amazing. When you're looking up at yourself, it doesn't look as obvious as when you like look off to the side, kind of, if you're just kind of looking over there to verify versus looking up. But I must say it is a breath of fresh air because you're going to get that fully articulating screen on the ZV-E10. Now, when it comes to the autofocus area and department, you're still getting some of the best autofocus with the Sony ZV-E10 and even with the a6400. Now, I do want to point out in video, you're getting eye autofocus in video on the ZV-E10. You're not going to get this on the a6400. It's going to be face only. Now, there's one thing that I never heard anyone mention when it came to the difference between these cameras, even some of the other Sony bodies, and that's the automatic white balance lock and the auto exposure lock. Usually it has been on just about any other Sony camera. Now, on the ZV-E10, you do not get this feature. And what this does is, let's say you're vlogging, you're out and about, you're wanting the automatic white balance to figure it out for you. Well, the automatic white balance lock is helpful so that when you go from one scene to the other, you have a button that you can press or assign in your camera to say, this one looks good, stay right here. I can actually assign this particular feature to the automatic white balance lock and the auto exposure lock. So that's something that I found that may or not be an issue for you. I think it's something to easily re-add in firmware, and it shouldn't have been taken out to begin with, because I think a lot of beginners will find it very helpful if they're using automatic settings to at least lock the white balance, where they can lock the exposure, but they can't lock the white balance. Another awesome feature of the ZV-E10 is a bigger screen. So while on the a6400, it's a little bit thinner, and then on the ZV-E10, it's a little bit wider, making space for your icons on your camera screen. I think the last thing to note is when it comes down to the question of who should buy either of these cameras, who are they built for? I think the ZV-E10 is more of a video centric creator because you don't get things that are more of this hybrid body style shooter where they can change the dials on top and scroll through and do a bunch of other stuff. Has an EVF, whereas this one doesn't have an EVF. But in video, you almost never really need that, or you're using an external monitor. So my recommendation is, if you're using the Sony ZV-E10 or you're looking to purchase it, then you're more of a person that is focused around video, and that's the things that you want to do, because the battery life, all that stuff is exactly the same. When it comes to the use case, external power ports and all those different things are available on these cameras, and they're both actually really fantastic for video. But I absolutely love having that eye autofocus in video, stuff like product showcase mode that's more centric to video use case. It does have that background blur button, but I do encourage you to learn some of the manual settings around what you're doing with your videos, just so you can maximize that depending on the lenses that you're using. A6400 doesn't have the background blur button, doesn't have product showcase mode, doesn't have eye autofocus in video, but you do get it in photos. So again, that's how you can start to see it's more for a hybrid shooter. Plus, you can find these for use anywhere upwards of $500 or $600. Anything cheaper is a steal, but you can find these at great prices, and they're still fantastic cameras. So if it's only going to sit on the tripod and you're using it for videos, maybe, but even then, updated body, much faster autofocus, eye autofocus in video, all the same things, USB-C instead of USB micro. I'm more lenient to go this route versus over here, because you get so many other things like Catalyst Browse, the digital stabilizations, other options, and a headphone port, especially if you're using your camera for video. So in my opinion, the ZV-E10 wins this battle.